everybody. How you guys doing out there? Welcome to How We Roll. This is the show where you guys get to hear bits and pieces of my story. Just to know, well, as it says in the description, this show was put together to show that my story is not that different from a lot of other people's stories. I am Solar Gray, the cinematic source. Wow, right on this one. That means the entire studio is diverse. And, wait, didn't get everything right. Just camera and myself less. That's a lot better. Alright, so, as I was saying, yeah, boy, this is good. So, we're here, and we're talking about now, for those of you guys that weren't, that tuned in, I believe it was last week, I'm not sure, I missed a week because I had some stuff that was going on, with internet stuff, and there were rolling power outages in my neck of the woods, so that became a thing. That became a serious and real thing. But before we really get started on this, I guess I have to do the whole business time thing. So just bear with us real quick. Ooh, I'm not liking the way that looks either. So what I am going to say is very simple. Thank you guys for showing up. Oh yeah, thank you guys for showing up. And I have to say, thank you guys for tuning in with me. Thank you guys for literally listening to the stuff I have to say about what it took for me to be a gamer and different things. Now, if you guys look down in the description, you'll see a little bit about what today's next part of the story is going to be talking about and how it might relate to a lot of you guys. I know it definitely related to me. But in the meantime, I would say if you guys have any questions or stuff that you guys want to share with me, feel free to roll a critical hit on that subscribe button right down there, and do the like, do the share, do all that stuff, and send us an email over at backinthedeck at gmail.com. It's BACKINTHEDECK at gmail.com. Again, subscribe to the channel and all that jazz, and let us not forget, we have groups over on Deckers on the Book, and that talks about the stuff that we do in the communities that we go to. Find us on SoundCloud and listen to just the audio of all the shows that we've been doing. We're talking years and years and years of shows that we've been doing online, on various platforms and things like that. And again, Instagram, but all of our social medias are either at backinthedeck or at midp. Now I'm going to do one little thing real quick. Yeah, there we go. And feel free to look at all that stuff so that we can help you guys maybe find gaming groups, talk to you guys about your experiences. And of course, if you guys like the stuff that we do, then please feel free to support us if you want to in a more direct method on our Patreon. That's at patreon.com/BID_P, and that has the absolute big full archive of the stuff that we've been doing over the years. So with that, I'm gonna say thank you guys for showing up. Now, when we left last week, right? Ooh, there we go. When we left last week, we had kind of a thing. Okay, last week we had kind of a thing, and a question was posed to me. Now, I talked about having gotten the D&D book, and I read the D&D book, and I did not understand what I was looking at, which again, when you get a game, you're like, all right, so I'm going to open a box. I'm going to do this thing. It's going to have these little things in it. We call them meeples. We and seriously, we have a lot of different things that we plan on doing. I totally get that. Sweet. Um, but then I look at the D&D book. Ooh. And I read a textbook and I'm going, I don't quite get this. So of course I go back to school once I get my hands on the D&D book, and I go up to Peanut, the dude that kind of got me involved in all this to start off with. And he helps me build a character over the phone, like we said, and that brings us to this week. So the next week I get into I sit down with him over the phone on a Saturday. And this is big because, you guys might have cell phones and all that stuff nowadays. But in the 80s and the early 90s, if you were calling somewhere that was more than just 3 miles away, there was, I'm looking for the right words here, there was what was called a toll charge. And essentially, your phone bill would shoot through the roof. I mean, we're talking like sometimes as little as 5 cents, sometimes as much as 15 cents. And we had these things called 900 numbers way back in the day. And and those were like 99 cents a minute, kids ask your parents type thing. And sure enough, I was on the phone with him for 2 to 3 hours. I got in so much trouble that Saturday because we had call waiting, and that was cool. That was very cool that we had call waiting. But the phone was still tied up with everything that I'm doing. And even beyond that, even beyond, oh, whoa, wrong button. There we go. Yeah, even beyond the tying up the phone, there were toll charges. So at the end of the month, the phone bill would go from like $30 to like $200 or $300. And I cannot tell you how often my hide got tanned for being on the phone that long with that many people. You get what I'm saying? So one of the things that happened was my mom got very upset, tanned my hide because, I didn't have that money. But that was all cool. That was all part of doing something outside of my immediate area. Do you understand what I mean? Because in my area, we could play pretend all day in the park using our own imaginations. There's a great tweet or not a tweet, a meme that was going around with sticks of various sizes and sticks of various shapes. And it was, if you don't know what this if you don't know what these are, you didn't have a good child. Yeah, hey, you didn't have a good childhood. So, and they were all sticks that we used to be like, this is my AK-47, this is my M16, I got a machine gun, I got a bazooka, I got a thermonuclear weapon, but that was it. That was all the pretend that we could do based on the materials that we had. And this was a load of fun and a load of possibilities, but there was nothing codified. So there I was with Dungeons and Dragons in hand, a codified rule set to how to play pretend with friends, and what seemed to be more than a Monopoly game. I say seems to be because remember, this was 1989, so I was 12 years old. Okay, I was 12 years old, and summer vacation hadn't started. So I play pretend. I play D&D with a lot of the people that I met at school. Peanut, Angel, Enrique, Slim, those guys. And they were on this level that I could not comprehend. Now understand, I grew up reading a lot of books. I mean, a lot of books. There was like Little Women, I read the Bible, I read the Encyclopedia, I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Robinson Crusoe, a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, a whole lot of Stephen King. I'm sure that some of you guys watching this are noticing one through line in this. There wasn't much fantasy. I did read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, specifically because of the 1982 television movie that was done by Rankin and Bass. The one where the guy is, the hands are amazing in the animation, but really the soundtrack was the thing that everyone remembered because you had a goat singing singing folk music about these short little people going off to slay a dragon. Y'all know which one I'm talking about. The greatest adventure is what lies ahead. I would pull up a thing, but I don't want to get flagged. But yeah, you guys know which one I'm talking about. And I thought that that was one of the coolest things that I'd watched in cartoon form. Specifically, that's when I fell in love with Gandalf and the whole wizard class. Before then, I was like into thieves and all that stuff. But it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. What it really was an opening up to genre, specifically genres without cars and genres without machines. So as I'm playing with these kids at school on the lunch break and before science club, because I couldn't get permission to stay later than detention would allow, and I was definitely not going to their houses on the weekends. Um, these guys, like, they played. They were like, they knew all of the initiative stuff. They understood Thaco. And for you older gamers out there, you know what two hit armor class 0 would mean. This is where I learned it from these guys. But these guys were very story oriented, which was interesting because when you look at them, they look like what we called back then cholos. Um, a cholo is essentially a Mexican gangster or a Latino gangster. We called them Mexican because I was in LA. So there we go. What we had going was pretty cool, and I noticed that I could do the different voices. I made myself a wizard character because I wanted to be like Gandalf, and I made the same action that every new gamer makes, which is basing the character that you make on a piece of property that you like and not realizing that when you first start the game, you can make that character all you want, but you're going to be making that character at the beginning of their career and not at the part that you recognize them. So I had magic missile, but I couldn't turn an acorn into a grenade. You see what I mean? Um, but it was fun. It was fun, and I was invigorated. That's what I was. I was just like, yeah, all right, this is awesome. These are like cool rules, and these guys gave me a set of dice. I didn't know dice came in 20 sides. What is this madness? And I did what every new convert does, which is take it home. I take it home and I try and drag my friends in on it, but unfortunately, I did not have the teaching skills back then that I have today. And I tried explaining to my friends. I had 3 friends that were on my block, and I mean really, really good friends. We had, just to protect anonymity, um, we had Pretzel, we had Nick, and we had my one friend who didn't play with us because he was in a wheelchair. Okay, we'll call him Bob. But yeah, he was in a wheelchair because he had severe cerebral palsy. But he was all into computers. That was his number one thing. He was the one with the video game system. He was the one that, though he only had the use of one hand, he could type 75 words a minute. This guy, Bob was a BAD donkey. He was such a bad donkey. Again, PG-13, y'all know what I'm talking about. But anyway, yeah, he was a bad donkey. And these were my friends that I wanted to take into this because, Pretzel and Nick played pretend with me from second grade on. And Bob was my video game connection and the reason I got into rock and roll and heavy metal. And I wanted to bring something back. I wanted to be a friend that brought something to the table other than my presence because that's what they did. They brought the games of pretend, they brought the video games, they brought the computer, and I had this thing. I had this role playing game, this D&D thing that it was, and unfortunately, I did not know how to explain the game. I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to teach it, but my friends, to their credit, were willing to sit down with me and beat their heads against the book as much as I wanted to beat my head against the book. And that was amazing. That was really amazing. I mean, for the first time, we sat down and we almost became an honest to God gaming group. That's what we were doing. We would get together at Bob's house, and sure enough, we looked through all that stuff. But then a thing happened. We hit yet another barrier to entry, another big wall. And that was the 1980s had it had done this press thing. A lot of gamers today don't talk about it, but it was prevalent back then in mainstream America, and it's still prevalent today. And it was something that we call lovingly, because it rhymes, satanic panic. And that is when evangelical preachers, those fire and brimstone preachers that are bathed in the blood of the Lamb, and they would get on their pulpits and they would talk about many, many things. They would talk about the corruption of youth. They would talk about all of these things that put the devil inside the house. Can I get an amen? Can I get a hallelujah? But then they would talk about all of the things that didn't glorify God. You know what I mean? And this was prevalent in my home. Not just my home, but in my block. Now, some of our families were pretty progressive. Okay, I came from a house that had a very, very personally religious mom. But since she was asleep most of the time, having worked the graveyard shift from, I would say, 2 weeks after I was born, until about, I don't know, 2014, she was progressive in the sense that she was unconscious and didn't really have much sway on what I could do or what I couldn't do. All she could really do was punish me or forgive me after having already done it. The other kids in the neighborhood, though, they didn't have that luxury. And this was a big thing. Now, we say Dungeons and Dragons, and we were like, yeah, let's go do this thing. And what we're thinking are, we are brave warriors that are slaying dragons and taking down demons and blah, 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 blah. And what they saw when they thought about the same things wasn't us slaying dragons. It was us cavorting with demons. And that was a really big damper. Okay, this was the parents in the community saying, we like that our kids play together, but we don't want them playing that because coming up with demons don't glorify God. Okay, it doesn't glorify God. And since it doesn't glorify God and Hosanna, hallelujah at every single term, then it is of the devil, because spectrums weren't even cable companies back then. Everything was as binary as the code that this broadcast is being streamed out on. I mean, it was tough. So one of the things that happened was the kids weren't allowed to play D&D, and if the parents found out that we were trying to play D&D, then the kids couldn't play with me any longer, since I was the one that owned the books. So that put me in a very precarious situation, because I had this great hobby. I had this great thing that promoted imagination and made me think more three-dimensionally about fictional characters and creative writing and consequential actions, because I had a GM that was very, very strong on your actions cause a ripple in the world. Therefore, if you do X, Y will happen, also known as Newton's third law. This was big. this was really, really big for me, and I wanted to share it with the people that I was closest with, my friends, but their parents kept saying no, which meant I couldn't play at home. Now, in this time, I had spent a lot of time away from home, a lot of time away from my house, because now the kids in the neighborhood couldn't play with me, so it was time to find a gaming group. Now, for those of you guys that watched the first episode of this, you would remember the 4 buses, 5-hour trip to Burbank to get to a store that didn't want me there. The players didn't want me there. So, again, in order to do something beyond what my area would allow me to do, I was the lonely fat kid again. I was by myself, and I had to figure out a way. Well, I had the luxury of being a part of a few groups, a few teen groups. I was like, big at the community center growing up because I had many brothers. Okay, I had 4 brothers, a weird one, a horny one, okay, 2 horny ones, and one artist. And the artist was the one that got me into comic books and stuff. But the two in the middle, understand I'm the youngest child by 7 years. What does that mean? That means if I'm in 7th grade, my nearest to oldest brother is in the 14th grade, also known as sophomore in college, although there was no college going to in these days. But, you guys get the idea, okay? I'm just starting puberty, and they're grown men. When I was a child, in 2nd grade, they were freshmen in high school. He was a freshman in high school and a sophomore in high school. And Steve, my oldest brother, who's no longer with us, he was older by 12, 13 years. And this was a big thing. This was a big thing because I didn't have anything in the middle. I didn't have anything at home except for my cousins. Okay. Now, my cousins were awesome because there were a lot of us, a lot of cousins. And they had, unfortunately, labeled me the smart one. So I tried going to my cousins about this. But the thing was, I did read much more prolifically than they did. And I had a larger vocabulary. And that made them very, very uncomfortable when it came to creating things. Now, we got over that in about 11, 12 years, And it was my cousin, the gangster, Sleepy, that loved playing pretend. She was the biggest one, and she was my senior by a year. And when her and I would get together, we would play these games of pretend. But her problem was the problem of a lot of kids that were in my neighborhood. Not just the religion thing. It wasn't about, being bathed in the blood of the lamb. It was about not enjoying the act of reading. And if you guys out there have ever played an RPG, you know it's not exactly light on reading, okay? Now, growing up in a fiscally disenfranchised area like South Central Los Angeles or the south side of Chicago and what used to be Cabrini Green or Harlem or the Bronx, or name that area in your city that the rich folk don't want to go to, there was this thing where there aren't a whole lot of resources for things like books. Okay, the libraries aren't very well stocked. The schools aren't very well funded, but we're forced to read in school because you got to learn how to read in school. The problem that we had back then was the reading in school was treated like a chore by the teachers and our parents doing the best they could with what they got. But the slave mentality that had been passed down in the United States was any form of trouble, as in difficulty, not disciplinary things, but all problems were to be interacted with as though they were disciplinary problems. Now, I'm saying that in very light language. But what that meant was if you're having trouble in math, then you're going to get your butt beat until you're good at math. Tutoring? Oh, no, no, none of that. Reading? Oh, God, no. No, 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 it's none of that. The parents didn't have time to read because they were holding down 2 or 3 jobs, and they didn't grow up in a time where nurturing was an option, especially if you're a person of my complexion or darker. Growing up at that time, it really came down to get good grades or be beaten until your grades improved. Were there learning disabilities? We didn't even learn about those until The Cosby Show talked about them in 1991. It was, you're not stupid, you're just not interested. Now I'm going to beat you until you act like you're interested. Which meant, yes, we got better at reading, but we got better at reading at the cost of the enjoyment of the act. Okay? Um, this translates to this: the act of opening a book and reading the words triggered post traumatic stress disorder from all of the beatings that we had taken in order to become skilled. You get what I mean there? I don't mean to bum you guys out. This was the time that we lived in, and this was before the internet, so there weren't as many research options as there are now. If you got good grades, you weren't congratulated. You were told you better keep them up or you get your butt beat. You got bad grades. You got your butt beat until you got better grades because, if you do your homework because you're afraid of being physically harmed, you'll do your homework. Will the knowledge stick? Not nearly as well as it would stick if you were nurtured. So there we were with this burden of learning disabilities and post traumatic stress disorder and various other obstacles, various hurdles that were put in our way when it came to doing the fundamental things like reading. Okay. What I'm going to do right now, because this has been a little, it hits a little close to home because it's my story, but it's a tough one. So I'm going to say, how you guys doing over there in the chat? You guys doing all right? Well, that's good. That's good to know, Ganja. He was the horny artist brother. But yeah, so what I'm gonna do is, now that you guys understand the difficulties in reading, I'm gonna get back to the story. I know I'm trying to work on the ums, the dead airs, and the ums. It's just I get a little verklempt on this show. Taking the stuff into my cousins, they had a difficult time because of all of the reading that was involved and all of the math that was involved. Now, growing up as a kid, I had a very, 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 very good vocabulary. One of the many beatings that I had taken was followed by the necessity to read the dictionary. So, as a child, I was rather loquacious. As an adult, I'm very didactic, so suck it! Anyway, but my cousins, they didn't have those complications. They had other stuff of their own going on in their house. Sleepy, as I said, loved playing pretend, but didn't get diagnosed with bipolar disorder and dyslexia until she was an adult. And this was a major thing that was holding her back from doing well in school because, how can you do well on reading assignments if, I don't know, the words turn into ants and run off of the page? And she had found herself gangbanging. But when she wasn't out doing the banger thing and she was hanging out with me, her smart cousin, we would play pretend. From playing with her Barbie dolls, what? Come at me. To playing these games of pretends and coming up with all these stories. And she was good at it. But she didn't understand the rules of literature and grammatic rules and things like that because school came with punishment came with triggers, and do the math or just watch this video again, share it with your friends, and go to the timestamp of about 15 minutes ago where I was explaining why it was difficult for us to learn when we were growing. So D&D didn't really have a thing for her. And my other cousins who were very close, and I mean, now I was fortunate because I had cousins that all lived within 8 residential blocks of where I lived. Now, as you guys who saw the first episode know, I was willing to go 20 miles away or 4 hours, 5 buses, that kind of thing, from South Central to Burbank to do something other than run from gangsters, fight bullies, and all that other stuff. So, 8 residential blocks. When I say 8 residential blocks, think about your address. If your address is 428, they were at 1251, so they were nowhere away. Sleepy was north. My first cousins, the daughters of my mother's oldest sister, were 6, 7, 8 blocks away. But they were west. So I go to their house and I try and show them the wonders of Dungeons and Dragons. Unfortunately, my mother's sister was not nearly as religiously open as my mom was, because she was conscious during the day. And I'm not a preacher's kid. Okay? I'm not a preacher's kid. They're not preacher's kids. But one thing about me that a lot of people don't know is that I was primarily raised by my great grandmother because she was awake during the day and she lived with us. And she wasn't just a preacher. She was the founder of a church in Texas in, I think, 1920. And when she moved to California, the church came with her. So I grew up in the halls of Southern Baptist Church, but my other male role model was very into a spiritual practice in South America known as candomblé. It's like voodoo, but it's not blood, it's not Haitian, and it is voodoo, but not what y'all think about it. Wikipedia and Google are both free, okay? So they didn't mind, but my great-grandmother did. She minded a great deal because in our house, we had various things happening on the weekend, like television preachers talking about the blood of the lamb. Woo, the blood of the lamb. That's what we had. It really was, it really was. And howling is the lamb. And heaven ain't quiet. Heaven don't do all that stuff. What heaven is loud. Everybody's making a joyful noise to the Lord. So, when it came to that, it's not like we were going to be playing at my house. So where did we play? Well, we didn't. Because again, if anyone in my house knew what was going on, I was going to get beat again. And my mother lovingly called me defiant, primarily because no matter how much she beat me, I wouldn't change my thought process. It was, you can break my body, but you can't break my mind kind of thing. And if I'm correct about an algebra equation, you are incorrect about an algebra equation, and you beat me to agree with you, that doesn't change the fact that your calculation was incorrect. And that's how I've always thought. So, yes, lamb's blood. So my immediate circles, my cousins, my friends, my brothers, all off the table. So it was then time for me to go to some of the other groups I went through. And some of the groups I went through had people other than African American. The Latino friends I had at school, some of the white friends I had at school, they were a little more willing. It was just a matter of hooking up with them. So there were a lot of study Saturdays. I'm hopping the bus to say West LA to study at my friend Sam's. I'm hopping the bus over to Playa del Rey to study with my friend Aaron. That's where a lot of that stuff came down. And it was different because these guys knew a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons, and they thought, okay, this is kind of a nerd thing. But I didn't realize at the time that I was building a community. I was building my own game group, and it wasn't a righteous crusade where yeah, it started off as that, but man, did that come down to a terrible, terrible, terrible end. Again, oh, it's of the devil, and anybody that and if he's gonna push this satanic agenda to corrupt our children, then our children just can't play with him. So, all right, that's a thing. But my other friends, they just thought it was for nerds. But then we sat down and we started coming up with stories, and the more I played, the higher my understanding of um, character. I guess you could say character depth, um, fantasy tropes, literary tropes. I became a better reader. And I started to become an okay writer because I always had these ideas. But there's a difference between a guy is born destined to be king and he becomes king. Okay, cool. What happens in between? You know? And that's the stuff that came out in gameplay. Excuse me for just a minute. Um, yeah. I'm doing this because it's prevalent to what the next part of this thing is. With my friends, we had good games. Unfortunately, a lot of my friends that came from places of a little more privilege like to get into their parents' liquor cabinet and smoke the marijuana. Now, I'd been a tobacco smoker um, since about that age. I just started smoking tobacco, and these guys were smoking pot. And in my area, on my block, well, not my block, but the block uptown, the block downtown, and both blocks east and west were seriously into smoking cracked cocaine. Again, this was 1989, so do your hit. Feel free to Google, but this was in the middle of the crack epidemic and the corner wars. These were the gang wars, where the Crips and the Bloods were shooting each other in drive-bys all the time. But it wasn't about the gang wars wasn't just about this is my territory, I'm keeping my block safe. It's this is my territory to sell drugs. And drug dealers are the most capitalistic people I have ever seen over the course of my life, because they don't care where you get the money, they don't care what your credit is, they don't care how old you are. You got the money, they got the stuff. So there was a whole lot of gunfire over there was a whole lot of gunfire over which corners were what, which corners weren't. And I wasn't banging because my mom had put down a fantastic mandate in our house, which was if we ended up becoming gangsters and she ever found out, she would shoot us in the back of the head while we were sleeping to make sure that someone who loved them ended their lives, and not a police officer who didn't care, and not another kid in the neighborhood who was fighting for dumb reasons. And sounds a little harsh, but you know what? It kept us out of gangs. Considering that, my mom was a little bit of a bad donkey herself because, how can I put it? My father was no joke. He was a very abusive alcoholic. They'd gotten into some knockdown dragouts, and my mom ended up being arrested one night where her only words that could be used against her was, "Is the MFer dead?" So when she would say things like, "I'm not afraid of going back to jail," or "I brought you in this world, I'll take you out, and I'll make another one that looks just like you," knowing that she had already attempted to murder my father, it came with a lot of credibility. She had a lot of credibility with that. So, being in a gang was not a big deal for my household. And this was where one of my brothers ended up leaving us because he got caught in a crossfire. And so she was really enthusiastic about anything to keep me off of them streets. You got to keep me off of them streets. Now, if I went to other streets, That was a lot better than being on the streets that I was already on. However, this came with the fear of being mistaken for a drug dealer by police officers. Now, fortunately, being the kid that wasn't drinking and wasn't doing drugs anymore, not that I didn't, but by the time I was 12, I'd stopped. That's a story that I'm not sharing on YouTube. Thank you very much. But being the one that's like, no, I can't be around this. When I was around my D&D friends, they would be smoking the tweed or the marijuana, okay, and dipping into their parents' liquor cabinet. I would come home smelling like I was doing that stuff. And that made things very, very difficult. So, one, I didn't do those things, but I was in danger of being punished for doing those things because the evidence was all over me. My clothes reeked of bong water. And, and the sad thing was I was more for psychotropics anyway. So when I would interact with the guys, we would have about 2 hours a good gaming session, and then the being different in a crowd thing became a problem. Now, I promised I'd talk about how not doing drugs and alcohol was a difficult thing when it came to having these social interactions. I would get into the how, and it comes down to this: when you're in a group of people that are breaking a lot of rules, such as doing the marijuana and drinking of the brandies and the scotches and whatever was in mom and dad's liquor cabinet that they picked the lock to, if you don't join them in it, that means you are stuck in a false dichotomy. Okay, it really is a false dichotomy because you're either going to snitch or you're judging them. That's it. There's no other possibility for what's going on. And the fact is that's not true. That's not true. It definitely wasn't true for me. I'm like, dude, you guys do whatever you want. I don't care. I really just don't care. I'm happy to be playing D&D, and if sitting around with your drunk butts is what I got to do to play pretend and not worry about getting shot or getting beat up by bullies or, being forced to go to church for, 6 hours on a Sunday morning, then that's what I'll do. That is what I'll do. That was a cool price to be paid for me. But after a while, I wasn't allowed to be in those groups anymore because the paranoia got higher and higher and higher. And don't get me wrong, I can understand that as an adult because the more it happens, the more the parents got to know me. How do you know that the parents aren't going to trick me into saying stuff about the liquor? Or how do you know that something just won't slip? I became a serious liability. So, all that, gone. Just gone. So I ended up doing the one thing that saying out loud makes people snicker, but it's a major option. And that was playing with myself. Playing these games alone. Now, from time to time, I did have my friends that I could go to the park with, and as the years passed, I had my cousins that we could spend more time with as long as we weren't playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm not going to mention the strange irony that we went to horror movies as a family and we're watching teenagers get ripped apart by Freddy Krueger or folded in half inside a bed by Jason Voorhees. That was fine. But these books with these demons, well, that's a totally different thing. But I say all the time, it's very difficult. The hardest part about dealing with someone who is brainwashed is to show them that they have been brainwashed. This is a sad fact. It really is. So I ended up playing games alone, playing D&D games alone and keeping notes on my adventures. I would throw myself into a fantasy world that I created. And looking back on them today, they were terrible. They didn't have gods, they didn't have weather systems, they weren't fully fleshed out worlds, but I had some pretty good stories. Now, did I become a writer? No, I didn't. I did not become a writer. But I got through junior high school. And what happened was I ended up getting through junior high school, playing Dungeons and Dragons, leveling up my characters as best as I could by myself. And that was when I got to high school in 1992. But we'll talk about that next week. Okay, we're going to talk about that next week because that was when gaming really, really opened up for me. What I am going to do is I'm going to check on the chat. How you guys doing? Yeah, math. Yell at me. Yeah, like that would help your multiplication, right? You know, add faster. What's 4 times 4? What's 4 times 4? Yeah, that totally works. Yeah, that is definitely like a really big thing. But I want to thank you guys because, you know, this is a 40-minute video and we're doing this on YouTube Live, so I don't want to tie up anyone's day as much as it seems I have been tying up people's day. So what I am going to say is, again, thank you guys for showing up, and thank you guys for, you know, sitting up and interacting with me on this level, because it really makes me smile that so many people actually want to hear my story, and it makes me smile and yet sad to know that my story isn't as unique as, well, unique to me. You know what I mean? I know there are a lot of us out there that are gamers that share common experiences, and this is why I put this show out there, to let the people like me know that not only aren't you alone, but, you know, I'm a 42-year-old man, and if you're 13 and you're going through this, know that it's been happening to people for a long time, and we over here at Back in the Deck, or BidP, we are seriously dedicated to letting you know that you're not alone, and to letting you know that not only can you play with us, but there's a lot more people that you can play with without judgment, without any of that stuff. But, you know, really? I ended up casting that spell, and now I'm being played off like it's the Oscars or something. So fine, I'm getting around to the wrap it up music. All right. So yeah, thank you guys for spending this time with me. And if you guys want to share your story, feel free to do so in the comments. You know, do the thing in the comments. Share this video if you guys know people that are like me or like you. And if you have a problem like telling people about your story and stuff, and there are parts of my story that you can really relate to, feel free to show those people. And we're gonna do the business time sign out. So, you know, again, roll a critical hit on that subscribe button, and just roll a regular hit on the little bell next to it so you guys get notifications about when I'm out. And drop me an email at backinthedeck@gmail.com. That's BACKINTHEDECK@gmail.com. You know, you're already on YouTube, so do all those things on that subscribe button and the share button and the, oh my God, I met this guy online that's just like me and all that stuff. No, look, Mom, this is my story too. And you know, feel free to join us on Deckers on the Book, where you can talk to myself or any of the co-hosts of the other shows. Hit us up on SoundCloud. Hit us up on all the social media, like at Back in the Deck. Also, the main place, if you're actually like wondering about where to really see us, where to get a hold of us, and all that jazz, is actually at that's actually, most of our shows are on twitch.tv/BIV_P, and that's where we do our shows that are Netflix and TV reviews, game reviews, more gaming experiences of things that are a little more modern, recommendations. Just we're live casting, God, 3 to 5 times a week, depending guys. Just letting you know we're out there and we are hustling. And if you guys want to help us out with that hustle, then feel free to hit us up at patreon.com/backinthedeck or /BID_P. That's patreon.com/BID_P. And again, I want to thank you guys for coming down. Like, I've been doing a lot of things for a long time, and I'm glad that I've actually been able to reach a few people with this show. Who would have thunk? You know, all the script writing that I've been doing over the years and all that stuff. I just got to sit down and tell people, you know, when I was a kid, things sucked, and people will tune in on that. So who'd have thunk? But yeah, with that, just let people know that if anybody tells you that you can't have the hobbies you like because of the circumstances of your birth, be it race, religion, creed, gender identity, sexual orientation, disabilities, or your budget, you just tell them that we said to take those cards and put them back in the deck. This is Solar Gray, the Cinematic Sorcerer, saying thank you guys for tuning in to How We Roll.